everyone, welcome. It's great to be here live for the next 30 minutes talking about the highest standard in AI. My name is Dani Almeida. I am a founding member of the go-to community for data and business professionals advancing AI adoption. Welcome to everyone that is joining us live. Please join our conversation and send in your questions via chat. We will answer them on the fly. I want to introduce our guest today. His name is Jeroen Franse. He's an AI Guild member based in the Netherlands. Jeroen is working as a machine learning engineer in a bank, and he is also the co-founder and chair of the Foundation of Best Practices for Machine Learning. Before that, he was a data science consultant, and he obtained his PhD in astrophysics. So thank you for joining me for the fireside chat today.
Thank you, Dania. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And then to get started, would you please share with us about your journey and how did you get to where you are today?
Of course. So I think I'll start at the beginning. So with the background in astrophysics. So this is really where I started with all the programming and data analysis and statistics, of course. After the PhD, I decided to quit academia. I thought it was too lonely, and the obvious choice was data science. I think pretty much all my former colleagues are now data scientists as well, and that's because the daily work is really very, very similar. You spend a lot of time writing code to clean data and then fit a model. It's just a different loss function often. I simplify it a little bit, but it was a very obvious transition. So I did data science consulting for a while for a company called Sogeti, and there I really got into MLOps and organizing data science, and also the responsible data science part. I quit that job a little while ago, I think about 2 years ago now, to focus more on my own ideas, so the MLOps and the responsible data science. I was planning to do some freelancing on the side, but Corona kind of made that more difficult. So in the end, I ended up at my current employer, that's ABN Amro, one of the major Dutch banks, as a machine learning engineer. And I ended up there because they were looking specifically for someone who was interested in MLOps and responsible data science. So it's really perfect for me. I get to do all these things I am most interested in. And then about a year ago, this more room that I created for myself resulted in us founding the Foundation for Best Practices in Machine Learning. So that's about a year ago. And that's been a lot of fun, very interesting to do as well. And that enables me to combine these subjects that I find most interesting, both in my work and to give something back to the community. That's very nice. I enjoy it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and you covered a lot there. I'm particularly interested in understanding what you explained, like simplifying the transition between astrophysics and data science. I think we have a lot of people also in the AI Guild community who transition from academia. And you're quite right. I mean, you are already working with data, you are running experiments, you're programming something. So it is quite a thing that people do. And then what to me is interesting is how you became really focused on MLOps. And maybe you can also share a bit how different it is, let's say, from your previous experience in research. Because in research, I understand that the main focus is really to publish the papers and push forward what the group is into. And for a business, it's more really about the operationalization or deploying the models. Can you maybe tell us a bit more, like how did you learn all of this and how you became to be this kind of specialist in MLOps?
So the last thing you mentioned is very, very true. That is, I think, a major difference in the work. Just publishing results of analyses versus operationalizing models. That really is a huge difference in how you do work. And the reason why I got it very interested in MLOps is because I found that this gap between research and deploying is kind of tricky to bridge. There's a lot of things that you, or at least that I'm sort of coming from the science background and the statistics background. I've thought it was very difficult to keep the link between what is in production and keep doing research. Right? So of course everything you do is kind of iterative, but just putting a model in production doesn't end end your project. You're not finished, because sort of every day that your model is in production is another day that your model can do something surprising. It's another data point. Every day your model is in production is another data point that needs to be sort of included in the research again. And creating that feedback loop, at least I found very difficult. So that's why I got into MLOps. I figured there should be easier ways of doing this. And then I did find a lot of frameworks that could help me in this. Frameworks that would have helped me in my PhD as well, by the way, like MLflow. That would have been really nice to have 8 years ago. So that's that part of it. I think you asked another question that I forgot momentarily.
No, thank you. Interesting that you mentioned also that it would have helped you to find out about those frameworks back when you were still at your PhD. And yeah, I think I also have experienced this kind of gap between, let's say, studying or the theoretical aspects of machine learning and then working to deploy the solution. You know? So I can say that from my perspective, this is also what brought my attention to MLOps. Though nowadays it's kind of one of the hot topics that we have in data. So I understand a lot of people are also looking at this, and maybe by Googling it, like I did, they will find out about this foundation for best practices in machine learning. So can you tell us a bit more about, yeah, I mean, I think you already mentioned what motivates you to do this or to start it, and what is it that you are pushing for? Like, what is the goal of the foundation and what kind of stuff you do there?
Yeah. Let me see where to start. There's a lot to say. So first, maybe some of my personal motivation there. So I've always, I think you could say I've always worried about how data is used in our society. Like, of course, we can use it to do many awesome and great and important things, but there's also many ways in which it can go wrong. I mean, nowadays you only have to look at the news or open a newspaper to see what impact algorithms and machine learning can have on our society, and often these can be pretty disadvantageous things. And also the way that our society sort of tries to get to the truth based on data. So epistemology, that's always, it's a very challenging thing to do, to get to the truth through data and statistics. It's very easy to make mistakes. And besides mistakes, I think there's also a risk of manipulation. If you have a lot of data about people, it's very easy to manipulate them. And that's, so talking about privacy here as well. So all of those things made me want to do something more with this subject in general. And then for machine learning specifically, as I said, we've been seeing the effect that algorithms and machine learning applications can have on society and on individual people. And for the foundation, we started with a bit of frustration here, that we thought that regulations are way too slow to be implemented. So we started the foundation a year ago, as I said. At this point, there was not much talk about regulations yet, and already we thought it was too late, right? We should have had regulations 5, 10 years ago already. So luckily now, since maybe half a year or so, there's been a lot of draft regulations and other, well, many draft regulations from all over the world have been starting to pop up. So that's a good thing, but still, it'll take years until they actually come into effect. So we felt that this was not really going fast enough, because you still see in the news many things going wrong, right? Um, and then another aspect that we felt was missing from the conversation about this, because the conversation was also a year ago was very active, right? The communities around explainability, around fairness and non-discriminations are pretty big and active, and there's a lot of work, very good work being done there. There was one aspect that we felt was a bit missing though, and it's an aspect that makes it so that all that good work that is being done didn't really seem to translate very well or very efficiently onto the actual work floor. Um, and the missing aspect there is the role that organizations play in organizing data science in such a way that the developers, the product teams, um, are actually able to easily, conveniently, efficiently apply all the things that we know about how to do data science responsibly. And that's why we started the foundation,
Yeah.
to really
Yeah.
sort of tie all of that together, and hopefully help speed up this development.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So, as I described before, I was searching for this kind of frameworks or guidelines because this is also a topic that we discussed a lot in the AI Guild between the practitioners. Is, like, okay, we, as you described it really well, like we have a lot of knowledge and we also take responsibility on what we are doing. So we want the organizations we work for, the solutions we work to develop, we want them to reflect all of this knowledge in a way that it's responsible. And this is not like a one person job, and like you described also, if it's deployed every day, you have a new data point. So it is like a continuous work, and it involves a lot of people from a technical perspective, but people from business, from product. So when we look at it, you're quite right. We also have this kind of frustration place that we started from, and then precisely this we started to discuss. Okay, what can we do? Like if we all have those common issues and topics, maybe there's something that we can do together as a community to figure out ways to like help ourselves even. And when I was researching for something, that's when I found out about you guys and the work from the foundation. And I really like it because, well, for one, you have everything that you were working on published. So that is pretty good. Like you have the wiki and you have the open source thing. So it is really, I think, a way to get started. Started not only to think about it, but to putting something in practice. So I think there's a practical aspect on it. And one thing that I also like that you have is you want to be this kind of point of reference, not only for machine learning practitioners, but also, like you mentioned, maybe for government or for policymakers, because this is something that we need really to bridge this gap and find out a common language. Yeah, because still, even between the practitioners, it's kind of different sometimes. I don't know what is data science in one place is data science in another place,
Mhm.
or there's still a bit of yeah, it's not really well defined yet, even for the own field itself. So I understand that it's not easy to people from the outside to also understand it. And this is one of the reasons why we are doing this highest standard by the AI Guild, because this is what we are striving for to be more maybe transparent and to open up this conversation so we can find out a common place that we can move forward from, let's say bottom up. And I see a lot of synergy with what you are doing. So can you tell us more? I would expect, because we're hosting it on the AI Guild page, that people kind of are already a bit familiar with what the AI Guild is doing. And I would like them to also learn more about what the foundation is doing.
Great. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for the kind words. And I think it was well said. Um, so what the foundation is doing is we publish. That's our main goal. We publish open source best practices. Open source means everyone can contribute to them, and they are free to use under the Creative Commons license. Um, so it's pretty big body of work, because we try to be complete. So you mentioned we try to be a repository. That's true. That was our first goal with our first release, to really be pretty complete. So all the topics are covered, both from a technical point of view, as from an organizational point of view, and from a product management point of view. So now it can hopefully function as a repository. And you also mentioned it, the common language is very important. So with the first release, we also had a few small user guides to help people navigate through this big body of work. And what we're mostly focusing on now is to write more user guides for this. Right? So maybe it's good to mention that the best practices, they are not a silver bullet or fire and forget recipes. Right? It's not a bullet pointed list of just do this, this, and this, and then you're good. They are, and it's difficult to be both generally applicable and very very practical, because a lot of what you have to do depends on the context of what you're doing, of the business you're in, of the particular project. So we try to walk this tightrope between general applicability and being as concrete as we can. So the best practices, they say things like figure out whether your data, for example, contains heterogeneous variables, or figure out whether your use case, or which kinds of bias metrics are relevant for your use case, and then measure those and then monitor those. But there's still a little bit of extra work to be done by everyone who applies them, to put it into your own use case. So the user guides that we're currently developing are sort of smaller guides that help you either find your way through the best practices, or are a bit more practical and focus on specific scenarios or specific topics. For example, choosing the right fairness metric is one that we're currently working on. Yes, and then because it's open source, we're also hoping to engage the community as much as possible. Right, that is going to be the greatest advantage, I think, of this, is if it becomes a community-owned, community-driven thing. We've now worked on the best practices with about 30 people in total, I think. 30 people have contributed, which is nice, but it's not the whole community. And of course, the whole field is going to keep developing pretty quickly. So that is going to be the main value, if we can get the feedback and the contributions from as many people as possible, and also their experiences, both good and bad.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Like the more people you have involved in this, or that are working with this, trying to make sense of it and apply it to their own context, the more you can expand, or maybe finding more examples, good or bad, can help make it more concrete to people that are looking to apply it. Yeah, this is also linking to the conversation we had last week, is pretty much depending on the context or even the business, because for different use cases, you would have different definitions maybe of those kind of abstract um, concepts that we are talking about, for example, fairness. So you mentioned the user guide work and maybe some concrete examples on what could be some measures of fairness. So do I understand it right that the user guides also have some use case examples or more concrete or maybe industry specific ideas on how to apply the best practices?
We haven't settled on this exactly yet, so we're hoping to put in some examples indeed. Um, we have some plans to make industry-specific ones, but we haven't started on those yet. But yeah, examples we will try to put in. So the user guides, because of that, will not be part of the actual best practices. The actual best practices, the itemized list of controls, will stay generic. But yeah,
Right.
then next to those will be the short user guides. How long would they be? I see on the screen a couple pages, not more than, let's say, 5 or 10 pages. And the best practices are controls, are itemized lists that we've already written. So the user guide would help you to apply the best practices in your specific case. That's the idea. I hope
Okay,
that
yes.
answers the question.
Yeah, so I see. So the idea is that the best practices are already there. I have taken a look at them. You can download the PDF. It's a pretty complete list, as you were saying, the controls. And I think it has pretty much like you said, the aim is to be complete. So yes, there are many aspects that are part of those best practices, not only from the technology perspective, but from different perspectives that are also related to what the organization has to apply, let's say. And yeah, maybe that is a hard, let's say, a starting point because it's so complete. It can be also like it's abstract and could be overwhelming. So the idea of the user guide is to be more of a shorter document, like compared to the best practices, and potentially with some examples or having different guides per industry to make those concepts more concrete and potentially then more straightforward to apply. Does that make sense?
Indeed, indeed, yeah, that's pretty much entirely correct. We're also hoping to get contributions from the community for this, of course. So the best practices, you can get them in PDF form from the website, but we also have them in wiki style. And on that wiki, so that's you can get there by just going to wiki.fbpml.org. You can leave your own suggestions there, suggest changes to the best practices, but there's also room for the user guides, and we have some tips on getting started because, as you said, it is pretty big and could be maybe a bit overwhelming. So what we usually say is, if you're just starting out, um, pick a few of the subjects that are most relevant for your work, for your organization, and start with those.
Mhm.
And then you can always expand later. You don't have to do all of it at the same time. And for organizations, it more or less the same applies. And so there's, as a data scientist or machine learning engineer working in a particular project, you can really dive into the technical best practices and use some of those. And for the organization, we suggest something similar. But so what, for example, the most important thing, in my opinion, for an organization to do is to realize that most data scientists spend most of their time being frustrated about things that they cannot do or all the things that they have to do that are not strictly speaking data science. And so I am fully convinced that almost all practitioners want to build responsible applications. But if your entire day is filled with having to chase people for approvals or trying to run your models on old infrastructure or trying to convince people that Kubernetes is a really useful piece of framework to have, then you just don't have the brain space to also care about all the other stuff. So I think it's very important for organizations to set up their support structure to get the resources, the skills available to the product teams for freeing up this mind space, this cognitive space for doing this. So that is one suggestion that we have for the organizations to start at that point.
Yeah, that is quite interesting that you say, because I also believe that this is where quality work really starts to get in production, so you don't have to struggle with this, or even like individually figuring it out if the organization has it more or less streamlined. So I like the direction that this is going, and I would leave here the link for anyone watching our community to really go check it out and put some feedback there. Maybe you can start taking, as you suggested, really nice idea to maybe pick 2 or 3 and start from that and see how it works and then build on that. And I don't know, maybe you have some examples of applying some of these yourself at your workplace.
I'm not sure if I can go into that much detail. Let me think. Oh yeah, so one of the best practices is about explainability. And there are many explainability methods, but there's a step before applying your methods that we have a best practice about, and that is actually much more important than you'd think, which is, well, at least from talking to various stakeholders, which is thinking about which stakeholder group needs which explanation, right? Because all explanations are wrong in a sense. They're always approximations of the true model that's beneath it. So you always lose some information when you present an explanation. And you should think about what kind of questions is a stakeholder trying to answer with this explanation. So let's say the managers of some department, they want to know something about how the model works in general, but an analyst, if you give them an explanation of a particular data point, they want to know whether certain effects have been taken into account. So I don't know, let's say if you do predictions on how much fuel an aircraft needs, and you present that prediction to the pilot who needs to be in that aircraft, they want to know, have you taken into account that maybe there will be thunderstorms, because there's often thunderstorms on this route and that kind of stuff. Which is, the pilot wants to know this, but the fuel managers, let's say, they need different kinds of explanations. Maybe that's a good example.
Yeah, it's something that is, like you said, it's very simple, and maybe it's not part of when we look at the methods for explainability. It's not something that we think about that much. We think about how to do it and how to get the answers, but we don't most likely don't think too much about what are the questions, or that different stakeholders would have different questions, and it makes sense. It depends on how or why you need to know this, what kind of decisions you're making on top of that model results. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, we still have some minutes. I would like to ask you if you have any specifics around the foundation that you would like to tell our audience, maybe people that are watching it at the recording as well.
Well, I think we discussed many of the things already. So what is very valuable to us is if you leave feedback. So of course we would like you to use the best practices, but leaving the feedback, like, were they useful? Is there anything you would change about the best practices? Are there things we missed? And examples, indeed. So how did you approach a certain best practice in your scenario, and was that successful? So some of our best practices are a little bit more general and use something that does, I don't know, use something that does drift monitoring. but we don't mention a specific drift metric. So, for example, if you say, well, we've done this drift monitoring and it didn't work because we used the wrong metric, that would be super valuable information to share with the community.
Right.
Um, so actually any feedback, but yeah, that would be great if people start giving us that
And
feedback and we incorporate it.
cool. And how they can give you this feedback? Do you have something on the website for this?
That can go through the wiki. So you can add information to each of the best practices on the wiki, and you can also suggest edits for the best practice that we already have. And there's a forum on the wiki as well if you have more general questions
Cool.
or
Then I
suggestions.
think,
Yeah,
yeah, I think now people have at least an introduction to the foundation. And yes, I'm really looking forward to have a chance to apply some of those. And yes, I also hope that our community will go there, check them out, start applying them, giving you some feedback. And I see that there is a lot of potential to develop this. You mentioned it before, and I totally agree that there is a lot that will be developed in the next coming months or years, especially also driven by the legislation that is coming up in the EU. So I believe that this will get more attention and people will start looking more at this. And it's great to have a resource that was already thought of and that is already published to anyone that wants to use it. You know? So also thank you for contributing to the field, and thank you for the nice conversation here today. Yes.
great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the nice words about the foundations, and I share your hopes. I share your hopes. So thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, anyone watching, for spending some minutes of your lunch break with us. And if you're watching the recording, know that you can join us for the live discussion every Wednesday at 12:30. Hope to see you soon. Have a nice day. Bye bye.